What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and you guys absolutely loved our breakout running backs video from a couple days ago, so we're going to run it back with the wide receivers today because breakout receivers are just about as impactful as the breakout running backs in a given year. Last year, 3 of the top 12 wide receivers in points per game did so for the first time. You had Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, and DJ Moore. And these guys, you pretty much got a free wide receiver one, either in the middle rounds, the late rounds, or off of waivers like Puka Nacua. So today, we are going to be on a mission to give you the 8 wide receivers you need to draft before they break out this season. As always, we put a lot of research and time into these videos. If you enjoy, make sure you subscribe, leave a like. Let's go. Like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen. Now, first up, let's talk about Malik Nabers. He's going at the 408 as the wide receiver 23 over on Sleeper, and I'll be honest, back in early July when we did our wide receiver rankings videos, I wasn't as high on Malik Nabers as I am now. It's tough. He's in a rough offense. We don't know how the touchdown upside is going to shake out in New York, but when we look at his home league ADP of 408 as the wide receiver 23, I think he's a smash there, and I would even take him as high as like the middle of the third round in fantasy drafts. When we talk about Malik Nabers, I want to focus in on the talent before anything else. This is, if it wasn't for Marvin Harrison Jr., who is the prince who was promised, this is somebody who is a special wide receiver prospect. We talked a ton about him during Dynasty season, and we look at points per game, so just PPR points per game over each year, right? Freshman, sophomore, junior, and we compare him next to Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. He goes toe-to-toe with those guys. He actually produced more than Jefferson did in his third year. Of course, Chase didn't play a third year, and Chase dusted both. That's because Jamar Chase is Jamar Chase, but Malik Nabers was also 20 years old in this season and also competed next to Brian Thomas Jr., and then also had Jaden Daniels, not Joe Burrow. Jaden Daniels was great, but Joe Burrow had so much passing volume, so much passing stats that's going to boost up Jamar Chase's points per game. Pretty much the point is, really good player, drafted top 10, and then also freak athlete. Where you can see next to Jamar Chase here, we're talking 6 foot, about 200 pounds, 4.3 speed, 42-inch vertical. He is a monster. He can play inside and out, freak athlete, production everywhere that you want it, next to another NFL stud receiver in Brian Thomas Jr., and now we have preseason usage that signals to us at least that we're not going to get off to a slow start in the NFL. That can sometimes happen for rookie receivers, and it's like, man, get them on the field already. I'm screaming at the top of my lungs when we're doing the rookie wide receiver report, but here, a 31.6% target share is not going to stick during the season, all right? That would be unprecedented for a rookie receiver, though it's in his range of outcomes, but something more like 25% would be about right, and even that is huge. He had a 31.6% target share when on the field during the preseason. This is a tweet from Jacob Gibbs. 13.3 average depth of target. So he's not just getting like your layup, JSN, Wan'Dale Robinson type routes that we've seen over the last few years. You're getting real wide receiver routes at a big boy target share, and that is huge because you're going to get after the catch efficiency. You're also going to get before the catch efficiency with your average depth of target. And if they build the offense out of Malik Nabers, that's going to be a lot of targets and a lot of efficiency just because of what he is as a talent. Now, the big thing to note here is him being used in pre-snap motion. He said here, Gibbs, Nabers has been used as the pre-snap motion man 5 times and targeted on 2 of those 5 routes. That's massive. When we get these guys in motion, that is a really good way to sort of boost things. We saw it last year with Keenan Allen in Kellen Moore's offense. We saw it as well with Tyreek Hill all the time with Mike McDaniel. Any of these guys that get in motion before the snap, it just is a huge boost to like fantasy points, EPA, everything you could possibly imagine. If Dable's going to use him in that role, in that specific way, as kind of like all around the formation, in motion, down the field, that is huge. Now, I know a lot of people's preconceived notions, we've seen this before with Chris Olave, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, where they're stuck in these bad offenses and they can't produce until they're out of them. Well, what I would say is I think that that's taking it a little bit far, right? The Giants aren't that bad. Dable's a good play caller. In 2022, the last time that Daniel Jones was actually healthy, Bush points it out here from Fantasy Stock Exchange, those Giants, 16th in points per game, 12th in EPA per dropback, which is just efficiency per dropback, 18th in total yards. Daniel Jones led the NFL in adjusted completion percentage, and then also their skill position players were garbage. They had Saquon Barkley, who was good, of course, but he led the team in targets. And then you're talking Darius Slayton, Richie James, Isaiah Hodgins. So now we have a good play caller and a better skill group, right? Now you get an upgrade of Malik Nabers. Now you get as well a Wan'Dale Robinson in there who should at least give you something out of the slot. And it should just be, at the very least, a better core of receivers and passing weapons for Daniel Jones with an already good play caller who's going to push the tempo and run a lot of plays. This is a really good blurb from Pat Thorman over at Establish the Run, where he breaks down the pace over on that site. And pretty much the gist is that if we look at Brian Dable, he plays relatively fast. During neutral situations in 2021, Buffalo ranked second in pass rate, third in play clock, seconds remaining, fifth in pace, eighth in no huddle rate as well. Then we go down to the second paragraph. Even during last year's tire fire of a Giants season, they ranked fourth in average play clock, seconds remaining at the snap, fifth in neutral no huddle rate, and they threw at the fifth highest clip on first downs. And that was all on an offense that couldn't sustain drives or get first downs. Now, if we get a decent offense, we should be much better. We're going to have a lot of pass attempts. We're going to have a lot of plays ran, which is big, right? That gives you a lot of volume. So anything that he can't get in terms of touchdowns should be compensated for with volume and pass attempts. And yes, there is a concern that he's not going to score touchdowns, but he could kind of give you similar to what Michael Pittman was last year as a guy who didn't score a lot of touchdowns but caught a lot of passes. He's also not all that dissimilar of a bet to a guy like Chris Olave, right? Bad offense, but good player who commands targets. That's what Malik Nabers is, but instead of going in the second round in your home league, he's going in the fourth round. And again, I would take him as early as the middle of the third. So Malik Nabers, I've come around on. I don't want to be the guy who's missing out on a generational talent, and I think that we might be too harsh on this Giants offense. Brian Dable, to me, is actually one of the better play callers in the NFL. Now, after that, our next breakout candidate at wide receiver is Tank Dell, who goes at the 506 as the wide receiver 26 over on Sleeper. And it's pretty simple what this boils down to for me. You guys might say, well, Ron, you like Nico Collins. How are you going to like Tank Dell too? Well, this is going to be one of the best offenses in the league. And as Josh Norris over at Underdog Fantasy has been saying all offseason, I just want good players and good offenses. And we're talking about a fifth-round pick, a guy that you're drafting as your wide receiver 3 or throwing in your flex. I'm very much fine making that bet because I'm pretty sure that Tank Dell is a good player. When we look at the top 20 wide receivers last year in points per game, Tank Dell was the wide receiver 18. And that was not even being a full-time player in terms of route participation. And that was also his last game he got hurt. That's factored in here, which was pretty much a 0 in his last game. And even then, he was between Amari Cooper and Chris Olave in PPR points per game. And last year, this Connor Allen tweet outlines, in the 7 games, he played 60% more of the snaps next to Nico Collins. He paced with Nico Collins across the board in terms of targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns, half PPR points, all of it. He looked the part again as a rookie. And when we talk about kind of how wide receiver careers go, year 2 is where we see a big improvement. Shout out to Ryan Heath over at Fantasy Points. He does this age curves and cliffs article every offseason. It's genuinely a must read. Like, I would go check it out. If you literally just type in Ryan Heath age curves, it'll come up. And the key takeaway that he showed here is he kind of looked at wide receiver performance over their career. And his key takeaway is that wide receivers typically underwhelm as rookies before making a big leap in their sophomore season. And here, if we get Tank Dell to improve and make a leap in his second year, we're talking about a guy who just finished in the top 20 wide receivers in points per game. If he improves on that, we're really cooking here. Then we also have the idea that, yes, I know, again, people are going to say, well, there's Diggs here, there's Nico Collins. It's too crowded. Well, what I would say is that we want pieces of good passing offenses, right? I don't want the wide receiver 1, like, I wouldn't take Deontay Johnson over Tank Dell. Yes, he's the wide receiver 1. Are his targets more clear? Sure. But he's not as good as Tank Dell. He's not as talented. And then also Tank Dell is in a really, really good offense where there's going to be a lot of touchdown upside. And I would even say these are Mike Clay projections here, right? He works over at ESPN. He has a free set of projections he does that are really useful. And I think that he's even being conservative here. He has them for top 6 in pass attempts, completions, yards, and touchdowns. I think with CJ Stroud, he could be top 3 in these categories and even fight for like first place in these categories and just go scorched earth, MVP type of run. Kind of what we saw in year 2 from Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. It wouldn't be all that shocking. Last year, they were 12th in pass attempts. So that's now projected to go up to 6th at the very least. They were 13th in completions, projected to go up to 6th now. They were 7th in yards, which to me just highlights how efficient CJ Stroud was on a per attempt basis. I think that 4th in yards in terms of projection is too low. And then 14th in passing touchdowns last year. They had just 23. This year, Clay has him projected to be 5th in passing touchdowns. And again, he's being conservative, trying to get things as accurate as possible. This isn't even his ceiling projection type of outcome. Like, this is just expected. So if they hit their ceiling in terms of this offense, 2 of them are going to absolutely destroy their ADP, whether it's Nico and Tank, or it's Diggs and Nico, or if it's Diggs and Tank Dell. I just want pieces of this offense. To me, Nico projects as the most clear number 1 option, but Tank Dell, again, in the 5th round is like your wide receiver 3. I'm all over that. Now, when we talk about our third breakout wide receiver here, we're going to talk about George Pickens. He's going to the 509 as the wide receiver 27 over on Sleeper. And I'll be honest, I haven't been drafting a lot of George Pickens. Like, I don't have him on a lot of my teams, but I want to change that because after doing this research, I'm actually really coming around on George Pickens because really what it came down to is in that Ryan Heath article, the most common breakout for wide receivers is actually year 3. But the year 3 guys this year are Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, all of them super, super obvious. I'm not going to mention them in this video. But if there was going to be a dark horse, I think it would be George Pickens. I think you guys are going to be shocked when we look at this data here. When we look at PPR point leaders from that 2022 wide receiver class, he's actually ahead of Drake London and behind Garrett Wilson in raw total PPR points. Then we look at per route. He's really efficient. In terms of yards per out run last season, his 2.11 yards per out run led the entire class over Chris Olave, over Rashid Shaheed, over Christian Watson, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, all of those guys. And he had garbage quarterback play. He had Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph with a Matt Canada calling plays, which is awful. Now, when we look at just the still down to man coverage, he crushed that as well. From David Gattiari here, he was behind just CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, Tyreek Hill, DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk, and Justin Jefferson, a star-studded list in terms of yards per out run versus man coverage. So when you just isolate it versus man coverage, he's beating that. I believe on reception perception, he had a 70th percentile or better win rate versus press. He is a really good perimeter wide receiver. And we even saw last year in games without Deontay Johnson, he was really good. 16.6 points per game in that 4-game sample. And again, with brutal quarterback play. And that should take a little bit of a step forward this year. Nothing crazy because we're going from, Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph to Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. But to me, if anyone was going to have that DJ Moore top 12 finish in a bad passing environment where he just gets there on talent and efficiency, I'm going to plant my flag and say my candidate for that would be George Pickens, and somebody I'm very much fine taking at this 5-6 turn. I think Kev breaks it down pretty decently here of Kenny Pickett was brutal. Now, of course, the quarterback situation isn't much better, but it's decently better, where Kenny Pickett threw 13 touchdowns on 713 pass attempts. That is awful. A washed Russell Wilson threw 26 on 447 last year, and then we're going to get some better yards per attempt here, some better per pass efficiency, and we also saw Justin Fields do it last year with DJ Moore in terms of supporting a wide receiver 1, and there's nothing else in this offense, right? You have the running backs, I guess, you have Freiermuth, and then the wide receiver 2 is Van Jefferson. So you could just see them build this passing offense out of George Pickens, and when that happens, that could very easily be like a 16, 17 point per game, like low-end wide receiver 1 at his ceiling. And again, in the 5th, 6th round, I'm very much fine with taking that bet. Then we have the Chiefs wide receivers, who I've been pumping up all offseason. The prices are still not high enough. You have Rashee Rice, who's the 6'10", is the wide receiver 33 over on Sleeper. Xavier Worthy, who is the 704, is the wide receiver 37 over on Sleeper. And we look at their underdog ADPs, it's just not caught up enough, right? Rashee Rice, again, wide receiver 33 on Sleeper. He's the wide receiver 27 on underdog. Xavier Worthy is the wide receiver 37 on Sleeper. He is the wide receiver 33 on underdog. So underdog is way higher in these players. I will say as well, make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy. It's the best way to get ready for your home league because you can be in the draft, you see Rashee Rice is flying off the board, you see Xavier Worthy flying off the board, and then you get to your home league and you see, oh my God, Rashee Rice is here in the 6th round. He's an absolute smash. I have to take him. Same thing with Malik Nabers, who's going in the late 2nd right now. He's going to be there in the 4th, and you'll be like, oh my God, I need to take Malik Nabers. It's just a great way to get practice against real players who aren't auto-drafting and taking a kicker in the 5th round or, putting their phone down after 3 picks. It's a good way to get some skin in the game and just see what a draft should look like in a sharp league, and you can take that and apply it to the league settings and the format of your home league. So if you want to check that out, make sure you use promo code Ron. They'll match your first deposit up to $1,000 is the word on the street right now, not $250. I'm going to get an updated graphic soon, but use promo code Ron. They'll match your deposit up to $1,000. You can find a link to that in the description down below or in the comments pinned at the top. But when we talk about Rashee Rice in particular, the biggest thing with these wide receivers is they're attached to Patrick Mahomes, who I think is going to have a really, really good season. Last year was a down year. His wide receivers sucked. They invested in the wide receivers, and everything should be much better this year. But Amon-Ra St. Brown is actually the comp for Rashee Rice, where Amon-Ra St. Brown in his rookie year, everyone said the same thing. Well, Amon-Ra St. Brown, he produced at the end of the year because he was the only wide receiver in this offense. Here's the thing. Wide receiver production and targets are earned, not given. If they weren't earned, then we would see guys who were all alone in their offense, like we saw Quentin Johnston last year, the only guy there in Los Angeles for stretches of time. He did nothing. Going out here and giving you 18.5 points per game from weeks 12 on is massive. That is not by mistake. That is him being a talented player. If it was that easy, we would see guys like MVS do that, and we haven't. If we go across the board as well, low ADOT, slot type of receiver, but Rashee Rice had a really good yards per out run, really good targets per out run, 85 PFF receiving grade, which is massive. Huge boost in points per game after week 12. And then his year 2 ADP, 60.4. That's actually like not even where he's going in home leagues. He's actually still going later than that. Again, prices in these default rankings, which is what this Rashee Rice is still not up to par to where it needs to be for Rashee Rice. Xavier Worthy is probably a little bit more fair though. And I will say, Xavier Worthy is not a guy that I'm expecting to finish as a top 12 wide receiver this year that I think has a chance to do so. Although, like, maybe, we don't know how good these rookie wide receivers are. But when we talk about the rookie wide receivers in this video, it's really more of the idea of rookie wide receivers giving you more points per game down the stretch of a season versus veterans kind of falling off and not giving you much. Kind of like last year, the comparison is Adam Thielen, who set the world on fire for the first 5 or 6 weeks and then kind of tailed off. Rashee Rice was unstartable, and then from weeks 10, 11, 12 on, he was a monster. I think that's what you're seeing for a lot of these rookie wide receivers. And you can see here as well, if we look at the top 24 PPR scorers at wide receiver from weeks 10 on, 4 of them were rookies, 2 of them in the top 12 in Puka Nacua, Jaden Reed. You also had Rashee Rice, and you also had Zay Flowers. So just something to think about with these rookie wide receivers in your drafts. And then we have Xavier Worthy, just in terms of his player breakdown. We have Dwayne McFarland over on Fantasy Life saying he could be this year's Tank Dell, and that gets me excited. This is somebody who had a 25% target share with Patrick Mahomes in 2 preseason games. The rookie speedster is working opposite areas of the field from Rashee Rice with a 20.8-yard ADOT, and he had an 89% route participation. Of course, Hollywood Brown wasn't healthy, but Hollywood Brown is always banged up. He's out there making less money than Gabe Davis and Darnell Mooney. I'm personally not projecting him to be the focal point of this offense. I think he's going to be more of a decoy and kind of sacrificial X in this offense. We'll see how it goes, but Xavier Worthy looks explosive. He's beating the defense deep, and he's already getting huge route participation shares, which we haven't seen historically from Andy Reid and these rookie receivers. I don't want to get too crazy, but it wouldn't be all that wild for Andy Reid to use Xavier Worthy in a similar way to what he saw in Deshaun Jackson in Philly. I'll just leave you with that. Our next player we're going to talk about as a breakout receiver here is Rome Odunze. He is the 6'12", as the wide receiver 34 on Sleeper. Sleeper's like the only platform that's like that high on him. On ESPN and Yahoo, you can get him much later than that, but this is another talent bet. Matt Harmon over at Reception Perception absolutely loves him. He had a full green route tree as a prospect, and he said, I don't like to often compare prospects to one of the top wideouts to play the game, but he compared him to Devontae Adams. And then at the bottom here, he says, Odunze will get an extremely high classification from me on the stacked wide receiver prospect rankings. Marvin Harrison Jr., Jamar Chase, and Rome Odunze are the top 3 prospects I have charted for Reception Perception between the 2021 and 2024 classes. He is that high on Rome. He has him in the same breath as Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jamar Chase. Then we talk about just his environment, and we're going to see this Bears offense be much different, where right now, Connor Allen has them projected, in terms of their Vegas projections, 16th most points in the NFL. That is huge. We're going to have touchdowns here, and then we also have Shane Waldron, a new play caller, who last year, or from 2021 to 2023, was top 10 in per play efficiency, was 10th in neutral pass rate, and was tied for 5th in neutral pace. So he's going to pass the ball, score points, and run up tempo. That's what we're looking for. And now people are very scared of Keenan Allen and potentially Rome Odunze being this like JSN kind of sacrificial slot guy. There's just no way. When we look at the stats from last year, right, Rome Odunze in college had a 15.5-yard ADOT and a 17.4% slot percentage. He is not going to work out of the slot and get these like dump offs. If anyone's going to do it, it's Keenan Allen, who looks a lot more like 2023 JSN, where JSN had a 6.4-yard ADOT, 69% of his snaps or his routes came from the slot. Keenan Allen, under 10 yards in terms of his ADOT, 59% of his routes came from the slot. And a lot of his production last year came from being the motion guy in a Kellen Moore offense. We're not going to get that this year with Shane Waldron. He's another year older. He's already getting reports of like being fat, even though I don't really believe that a ton. I know Hayden Winks has been watching him on film and says he doesn't look the same. He's a 32-year-old wide receiver. He gets banged up all the time. I will say, like, this is not me saying that like right out the gate, Rome Odunze is going to be the guy. With these rookie wide receivers, again, we're playing for late season. I think Keenan Allen will be out there in 2 wide receiver sets early, but if he tweaks something or if he's not that good, we could see Odunze just be undeniable to the point where by week 7, 8, 9, he's out there in 2 wide receiver sets as a full-time wide receiver and is a league winner this season, and that's what I foresee for Odunze. Then speaking of Shane Waldron, as much as we like Shane Waldron for the environment, we don't like him for the role he gave JSN, right? JSN had that really bad role last year of 6.4 yard ADOT, 69% of his routes came from the slot. Really bad stuff where it's impossible to be efficient on a 6.4 yard ADOT unless if your name is Deebo Samuel. But he gets a new offensive coordinator. He gets Ryan Grubb, and I'm very high on what this offense can be in Seattle. This is a tweet from Hayden Winks. When we look at his pass rate and his deep pass rate, he's up and to the right, meaning that he's throwing the ball a lot and he's throwing the ball deep. So we're not going to get super low ADOT stuff for JSN, and you can get him right now on Sleeper at the 904 as the wide receiver 45. I would take him as high as like the early 7th, late 6th JSN. And when we look at Ryan Grubb's offenses, they were really good. Now, of course, they had Odunze, they had Michael Penix, but when we look at EPA per play, EPA per game, success rate, crushed across the board. So this is a really good offense. This is a modern college-style offense that wants to push the ball downfield and pass the ball a ton. That is huge for JSN, who can kind of be this like vertical slot type of guy for this offense. Of course, Lockett's there, Metcalf is there, but there should be enough to go around for 2 to 3 pass catchers in this offense to be every week fantasy starters, and I think Tyler Lockett could be the odd man out. He's getting old. He's coming off pretty much his career worst year in terms of efficiency. He didn't have 1,000 receiving yards. He didn't look all that great. And now we have JSN who's ascending, going into year 2. And when we look at his reception perception from last year, not bad, right? 70th percentile versus man, 76th percentile versus zone. And Matt Harmon said on reception perception, the film tells a clear story from JSN in terms of his rookie season. It's not one of doom and gloom at all. He showed off the ability you want to see out of a good starting flanker and slot receiver, carried over most of the positives from his college profile, and even showed some growth that I wanted to see from him. So he passes the in-isolation test, which is so critical for these year 2 receivers. So he could improve this year, kind of like what we talked about with Tank Dell. And then also when we isolate his routes here from Jacob Gibbs, his slot routes were bad, but that's because he had that really crazy like low ADOT roll with Waldron. But when he was actually used on the outside, he had a 2.43 yards per out run. That is really good. Like anything, like remember we talked about George Pickens, 2.11 yards per out run last year. He runs pretty much all of his routes from the outside. So if we're talking about JSN on the outside, now of course he's not playing X and getting press like George Pickens, but 2.43 yards per out run on the outside is crazy. He's good against zone. He's good against man as well. So he can do it all, JSN. And this year, Ryan Grubb could unlock him in this offense. And then our last player here is another rookie that we're kind of hoping breaks out down the stretch of the year. But if anybody can just kind of hit the ground running, it could be Brian Thomas Jr., who the Jaguars absolutely love. He's already out there in 2 wide receiver sets. This is from the first preseason game when they had the starters out there. Adam Levitan says here, wide receivers routes on 5 Trevor Lawrence dropbacks. Brian Thomas Jr. ran a route on all 5. Then you have the 2 wide receiver sets, and the Jags were in 2 wide receiver sets on 2 of those snaps. Christian Kirk did not play in any of them. It was Gabe Davis, and it was Brian Thomas Jr. So Brian Thomas Jr. is in every snap, every route wide receiver right now, a starting receiver in the NFL on a Trevor Lawrence offense who wants to push the ball downfield, wants to score points, and they love this kid. They keep talking him up. Coach Speak Index says here, this is a Press Taylor, he's the offensive coordinator. He said, you just see the progression. You see a little bit more of him becoming who we knew he would be. And again, I think he's a long way from where he's going to be in 2 weeks, let alone 18 weeks from now. And this is what we kind of talk about with the rookie wide receivers blowing up down the stretch of the season. This is why you draft wide receivers in fantasy that are rookies, because you're not putting them in your flex or your starting wide receiver spot early on. But as they get better and they get on the field and they earn more trust and more targets, you could look at a monster that is like a top 12 option from weeks 10 on. And that's a huge difference-making asset for your team, because that is the weeks that we are making money, winning championships. That is when these rookie wide receivers come out and are huge difference makers. And that's what I think Brian Thomas Jr. can be as one of these LSU receivers that is no slouch in terms of like him and Malik Nabers. And we talk about like all time with these LSU receivers of like Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. He's right up there as someone that's really good, man. He had 68 catches for 1,177 yards and 17 touchdowns. And his physical like size speed is crazy. Now, I'm not calling him the next Jefferson. I'm just showing it as a comparison. We're talking 6'3", 209 pounds, 4'3" speed, 38.5-inch vertical, just an absolute monster, and I love the way that he fits in this offense, where the Jaguars are projected for the 15th most points by Vegas, so they're going to score the ball, or not score the ball, they're going to score points. And you also have Mike Clay, who has them projected for the 8th most pass attempts. So we're going to get pass attempts, we're going to get scoring, and then also Trevor Lawrence was one of 5 quarterbacks last year with 70 or more passes of 20 or more yards attempted, right? So 20 plus air yards. So he's pushing the ball down the field. And Brian Thomas Jr. had the 2nd most yards in college football on targets of 20 or more yards downfield. I believe he was the highest graded receiver on those types of receptions. So he operates downfield. Trevor Lawrence is looking for a guy he can just bomb it deep to. Brian Thomas Jr. can be exactly that. Now that's going to do it for us today. As always, if you want to make sure you're targeting these breakouts in your drafts, I have all of them pushed up in my rankings over on Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. I have my top 200 cheat sheet. I update it like pretty much every morning. I have my targets outlined, my fades outlined. I have everything tiered so you kind of know how I see the tier breaks in your draft. And I even have, based on our consensus rankings, the target rounds for each player of, where you should be trying to draft these guys, right? Malik Nabers in the 4th round is a guy that I have pushed back a little bit further so you can try and get him at value, or you can just say, you know what, Ron has him in green and highlighted, I'm going to take him here and get my guy. So you can kind of use it how you'd like to, and it does filter you down the draft strategies we talk about, where it pushes up those legendary running backs early, the wide receivers in the dead zone with the quarterbacks and tight ends, and then you're hammering the RB2 profiles later on in the draft. I think that you'll really enjoy it. I use it for all my home leagues. I use it for all my high stakes drafts that you guys watch every night. But if you're not interested there, which you can find in the description in the comment section down below, just leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, oh, oh.